also had a discussion on the HFSF buffer, and we noted and knew that there were, we hope, industrious work streams ongoing, both in Athens and in Brussels, as there is this tale of two cities, where meetings have to take place in different compositions and with different themes. Now, as this has been ongoing for some time, it was considered to be necessary to bring all of us up to speed so that we share the same information. I would ask the three institutions to brief us in the usual sequence on where we are in terms of the negotiations, discussions, or whatever you want to call them, knowing, of course, that as per the 20th of February, the target date of end of April, which we should be working towards.
Has entered the conference.
We also know that with the procedures that we have significant parliamentary and other procedural requirements. So we know that our timelines are fairly stretched ones. Next week, as everybody will know, fortunately not yet in the media, there is Euro Working Group / EFC Wednesday, Thursday. The week thereafter, most of us will be meeting by chance and not in Washington. And the week thereafter, on the 24th and 25th, we've got the informal ECOFIN, and thus also a Eurogroup in Riga. So these are the timelines. So I'll be asking the three institutions to brief us on where we are on these discussions. I have heard Nikos being in on this call. I will then ask Nikos to react and evaluate the situation from the point of view of the Greek authorities. My colleagues may comment and question, and I will try to draw some final conclusions where we are and what the implications for our future work will be. With that, I turn to colleagues from the Commission. Who is online for the Commission?
Thomas is Marco.
Marco, yes, hello.
Hi, and welcome to everybody. Let me give you a broad view on how we see the progress that we have been making in the past days and weeks. We have also Declan Costello, so our mission chief online. He may come in to give you some further details. And I hope I don't drop out to the floor because I'm a bit challenged here logistically. Okay, how we see things. I mean, some progress has been made in the negotiations, both in Athens and in Brussels. Greek ministries are at last starting to provide detailed information to our teams who have been there in Athens for almost 3 weeks now. However, one should recognize that the pace and intensity of the dialogue is, in our view, insufficient to reach an agreement by the end of April, and the end of April is what Thomas, you recalled, has been the agreed, say, institutional deadline. Technical teams in Athens are struggling to get essential information on the policy intentions of the government. We have the experience of Greek officials attending the meetings who are sometimes unaware of plans, or they do not seem to be allowed to share such information. The institutions have been
has entered the conference.
other colleagues from the ECB and from the IMF will confirm have been patient and flexible. But I mean, we have to see, to stress again and again that the working methods are not efficient, in particular when one considers the extreme urgency of the situation. I think it is high time to focus on the substance and not on the form of the negotiation, and it is imperative to step up the pace of the discussions. I mean, to this end, I think it's important that that the authorities need to ensure that senior staff attend the technical meetings in Athens with a clear mandate to discuss the policy plans of the government. And it needs to cover all policy matters under review, and I think not only some of the priorities which are favored by the authorities. I mean, this is as far as the in general terms, as far as the meeting in Athens go. The discussions in the Brussels group were useful, but they essentially remained limited to the policy intention of the government, and we are lacking the necessary details on almost all issues. And we know that the details matters, as without a sufficient level of let's say in-depth discussion and details, we simply cannot make a meaningful assessment on individual reforms, nor on the package as a whole. I mean, it is still not clear to us which measures the government is prepared to proceed with. You remember this, the 70 and the 30% division, so prepared to proceed with, so it should be formally part of the 70%, nor do we know what new measures are in the pipeline, so on the 30% left. I mean, based on discussions in the Brussels group, there seem to be the potential for common ground on a number of issues, including here the revision of the income tax code, the code of codes, the modernization of the judicial system, measures to tackle tax evasion and improve VAT collection, creating an independent tax administration, removing unnecessary barriers to competition and making it easier to do business. We cannot proceed on the basis of intentions alone. I mean, we need to see all aside from the delays caused by the working methods. I mean, progress on the policy discussion is being held up by several factors. First, there is a tendency to reject policy options out of hand on the ground that they were developed by the previous administration, rather than on ground of substance, including, let's say, proposals which were devised with the assistance of organizations like the OECD or the ILO. And we know that the government is, at least we understand, willing to cooperate with these organizations. So I think this is, it's important that we have clear instructions from the Prime Minister to all ministries, to move away from this somewhat ideological stance. The legitimate desire to protect the vulnerable is by the second point is either holding up critical reforms needed to get the economy moving. As an example, it is essential that the problem on non-performing loans to banks is tackled, so that people can afford to pay their loans, afford to pay their loans, actually do so. I think it is unacceptable that people with low incomes cannot afford to service their mortgage would be made homeless. So this, I think, there is a need to square these two objectives by enabling banks to to threaten to seize the assets of people with high income and assets, and also by ensuring that there is a functioning social safety net. I mean, we strongly urge the institutions to develop targeted schemes to protect the vulnerable in the society, including via means testing. And there is no need to have a blanket extension of the moratoria on the foreclosure of primary residences. No, there is a need to have an installment fee for the payment of back taxes that is unrestricted for persons with large, debts up to 1 million euro. I mean, these policies, actually they run against the stated objectives. They de facto favor the rich and punish the honest citizens who are serving their loan and paying their tax. Now, the policy intentions are, as I indicated, not only in a number of instances unclear, but we continue to face cases of backtracking. For instance, we remain concerned that the position of the National Anti-Corruption Coordinator has been, de facto maintained without prior consultation and without clarity on the institution that will implement its critical policy areas. We have concerns about the intention to suspend part of the previous pension reform, and we lack clarity on how the government plans to reduce the exemptions on access to early retirement. I mean, the scope and ambition of the privatization process has been substantially scaled back, which clearly has implications for the DSA, but also negative implications on competitiveness and FDI going forward. I mean, even if reforms are not planned for the near future, we need to have clarity on the government intention regarding the system of minimum wage and collective bargaining. So as you can see, I mean, from the examples I've given, we are far from having an agreement on a comprehensive and credible set of measures to deliver fiscal sustainability, financial sustainability, and economic growth. I mean, the process to reach agreement is clearly very suboptimal, and there is a need to radically step up the pace of discussion to discuss in detail and face hard choices. Now, on the next steps, as far as the discussions are concerned, I mean, first, our technical teams remain in Athens. We continue to have meetings this week. We remain available next week, provided that the authorities are well prepared. This is Athens. As to the Brussels discussion, we are available to discuss the Brussels group formation as and when the authorities wish to do so. And there are many issues left to discuss, including the fiscal targets for 2015 and beyond, as well as the post-June agreement. Maybe, Thomas, I can just say a word in general on the liquidity situation, which is acute and be best alleviated by sticking to the process agreed by, with the Eurogroup and the leaders. I mean, this means reaching an agreement with the institutions on a credible package of reforms covering all policy areas. And we think it's not very helpful to keep reopening the idea of proceeding with, a limited set of reforms to unlock some form of bridge financing. I mean, T-bills or the use of S&P profits. I mean, we are fully aware of the challenges that Greece will face in April. I mean, both to repay the loans and to pay wages and pensions, and I think Greece must do its utmost to cover these critical external and internal obligations. I think there is a specific point which is important. We have been discussed also with some colleagues who have direct experience in the matter. I mean, Greece should urgently adopt legislation that would give the government the automatic right to access the bank balances of general government entities. As I said, this practice exists in a number of EU countries, and technical assistance can be provided to enable this. Thomas, I have been pretty long, but I wanted to give our feeling on where we stand on the various points. Thanks a lot.
So, Marco, I think that was very fine to give colleagues who are not as intimately associated with these discussions as the institutions are a flavor of where we are, at least from the point of view of the Commission. Others may have other views. As usual, I turn now to Benoit.
Yes, good afternoon. Let me start by saying that I fully concur with what Marco said. So I don't have to be very long. I will confirm a number of points first related to the process and the general advancement of the discussion, and then I will focus on a number of financial system issues which are closer to the ECB's remit, and also liquidity. So starting with the process, let me first thank the Greek colleagues and their authorities for the policy discussions that have taken place in Brussels. They've been extremely constructive. It was extremely good that all topics could be freely discussed, and we have seen a substantial broadening of the scope of the discussion, which really goes in the right direction. Starting from the list initially sent by the Greek authorities, and then gradually broadening to the full range of economic, fiscal, and social issues. So that's certainly very good. Let me say, however, that we are still at an early stage of the work, which is needed to conclude the review. A number of policy intentions and initiatives by the government go in the right direction, which is very welcome. It is very positive that the authorities express a strong commitment to tackle corruption and vested interests in the Greek society, and any step in that direction will have our strong support. That is most needed. Many of the policy intentions, however, today remain relatively unspecific, and as we all know, the devil normally lies in the detail, and so we look forward to work closely with the administration to refine the policy plans, and as a first step to understand better the policy plans, and then to discuss the details. So that was a useful first stage, but we now have to go into more details, more granularity in a number of areas. Also for us to be in a position to provide a costing of these different measures. So we appreciate the numbers that were sent by the Greek authorities, but the role of the three institutions is to be able to check the numbers, to form a judgment on the numbers, and we are not yet in a position to do that given the lack of details. And and here the conclusion in terms of process is that it really lies in the pursuit of the discussions in Athens at a technical level. As Marco already said, we have to note that a number of proposals clearly run counter to the current program and its objectives. This is not only about the labor market and the tax policies where there are obvious differences, but also in other fields. And as we've already said in previous discussions and meetings, it is problematic that the authorities have proceeded to legislate in several areas even before the discussion had started. And that includes the installment law, the dismantling of the National Anti-Corruption Coordinator, and the transfer of powers away from the semi-autonomous tax administration, which all go counter to the objective of either improving the governance of the tax system and or even of improving the fairness of the system. and that relates in particular to the installment law, which is extremely generous and covers a number of households which clearly don't have problems paying their taxes. In terms of the speed of the process, as Marco said, we really are at a point where we need to speed up the process if we want to achieve the objectives that were agreed in the Eurogroup meeting. We acknowledge the difficult funding position of the government, but that's the only conclusion here is that we have to step up the intensity of the discussions, both at the policy level and at the technical level, in order to make sure that a political decision can be reached as early as possible. But the answer here lies in the quality of the discussion and the granularity of the discussion in Athens and in Brussels. And Marco said that our colleagues have been in Athens for 3 weeks, which is actually true. But the fact is that the real discussions in Athens have started last Friday. So we have a record of 4 days of effective technical discussion in Athens. So out of these 3 weeks, only 4 days were intense, useful, granular technical discussion in Athens, and that's obviously not enough. So it goes in the right direction, but it's not enough. Moving to the financial issues. As Marco said, the challenges to the liquidity conditions remain high. The pace of deposit outflows is again increasing. So as we know, there is quite a lot of daily volatility in the numbers. So I'm not commenting on the daily numbers, but we are worried by the accelerating trend that we've been seeing over the last week. As a consequence, central bank operations or reliance on central bank money also has increased today to around 107 billion euros. And remember that the starting point was early December, 45 billion euros, and it's now 107 billion euros reliance of central bank money, which gives you the measure of withdrawal of private funding from the Greek economy. As you also know, the ECB week after week is increasing. It does not object to an increased emergency liquidity assistance provision by the Central Bank of Greece. Again, last week, the ELA was increased to 71.3 billion until today. And later today, the Governing Council will again discuss further ELA increase. So the financing of the private economy remains ensured by continued ELA provision by the Central Bank of Greece, which is not being objected to by the Governing Council. Finally, on two specific financial sector issues, on the moratorium, which Marco also mentioned, we are concerned that the envisaged legislation may have adverse consequences also because of its broad scope. So it's the same reaction than for the installment law, but it starts from a good objective, which is in this case to protect vulnerable households, and we fully share this objective. But it is designed in a way that is extremely broad, that will benefit people that don't need it, and that will also undermine the payment welfare and can create moral hazard, and undermine what is currently one of the remaining assets of the Greek economy, which is the healthy situation of the banks. Banks have been recapitalized last year with private money, and so this is not new debt for the government. This is private money that has been invested in the Greek banks. They are adequately capitalized. That's one of the remaining assets to ensure confidence in the Greek economy. It's very important not to undermine it further, and we are concerned by this law. And as Marco concluded, we would encourage the authorities to work on a social safety net for the most vulnerable households in a general way, in a cross-cutting way, as a permanent solution to address the vulnerabilities at the lower end of the income scale, rather than design different sectoral laws in a way that can create unintended consequences. And finally, on the HFSF, the Hellenic Fund. It is very important that the HFSF can continue to operate as an independent institution at arm's length from the state. And we are concerned by the recent resignations of two members of the General Council of the HFSF. So we urge the authorities to protect the independence of the HFSF and to follow the procedures of the HFSF law in appointing members in the General Council. That's also important for financial stability. As a conclusion, let me say that there are often references to, in the discussions, to the ECB either reinstating the credit rating waiver or lifting the TB ceiling. That is a decision that will be taken by the Governing Council in full independence and based on the advancement of the discussion. And what the Governing Council will need to see to take decisions is a credible perspective of a successful conclusion of the review. So what we're discussing here is, do we see a credible perspective of a successful conclusion of the review under the existing arrangement, meaning that this is not only about the pace of the discussion, but also about the breadth of the discussion, that this is about potentially, ultimately, concluding the review, which is about covering the full range of the arrangement. So that is what we want to see, and what we want also to hear from the EWG before the Governing Council of the ECB can discuss it in a meaningful way. I stop here, Thomas.
Thanks very much. Also very comprehensive and clear. I turn now finally from the three institutions to Rishi. Rishi?
Thank you, Thomas. Good afternoon to everyone. I can be extremely brief. I fully agree with what Marco and Benoit said, and I have nothing to add further at this stage. Thank you.
That was even more clear, but okay. Colleagues have apparently been very comprehensive and experiences more or less in parallel. Let me turn now to Nikos to give us the Greek perspective on how things have progressed, especially in the last couple of years. Hello.
Hello. Thank you, Thomas, for... I would like to address several of the issues that Marco and Benoit raised before. First of all, about the meetings of the technical teams in Athens and in Brussels group. I'm happy to note that you understand that it is a common understanding that the meetings in Brussels in the last 3 days showed progress. And it was a better understanding from our side and the side of the institutions. I also happy to note that you see that there is progress on the work that is done in Athens at the level of technical teams. Let me, however, remind you that this was a very new process that has been established, that we have a meeting at the Brussels group level and then meetings at technical teams in Athens. So we had to find out a way to cooperate with each other. So at the beginning, when the modality has changed and people did not go to ministries and ask whatever type of data they liked, first, the technical teams from the institutions were not well prepared, and there were no specific questions asked. At the second level, when we got specific questions, we had in actuality an infoglut. We were flooded with information that our people, and to be frank, our young government, could not answer to your heart's content. So communication was indeed suboptimal. But I think that recently we have found a way to work in a more efficient and more productive way. And since you understand, I believe, that our intentions are to give you as much information as you require to perform the review, We can carry on as long as it is necessary, and I think that you understand very well that there is no stonewalling from the part of the Greek government. So in that respect, I think we have reached a modus vivendi in providing that information, and we will continue to do so. So the more we cooperate, the better the flow of the information will be. Now, on the other hand, in the Brussels group meeting in the last 3 days, we have presented a number of our proposed reforms, and we have actually put numbers on those reforms. And we compared the baseline scenario with reforms we intend to take that will affect that and produce a viable solution for Greece. In fact, after the discussions we had, we produced a new document that has taken into consideration all those comments we have received, which we have sent a few hours ago to the members of the Brussels group, and I will be very happy to send a copy to all members of the Euro working group. Now, there are many issues I would like to address. For example, it was mentioned that there is a tendency, when a good measure has been adopted by the previous government, that to resist to adopt this measure simply because it has been adopted by the previous government. This is simply not true. To be frank, in many cases, when we entered ministers' offices, we find only the furniture, so in some ways we are not even well informed about their work that has been done from our side. But also, we know, and I think you know, that our true intentions is to apply all those measures that would lead to the creation of a better, just, fair, and more efficient state that is commensurate to the expectations of the Greek people and our partners in the European Union, to which we are unwaveringly committed. For example, there are other international organizations, such as the ILO or the OECD. We are working in close cooperation with them. There are teams, as we speak, from our ministries that go through the OECD people to produce agreements. So this is not an ideological thing we're talking about. And in fact, ideology works both ways. What you see as common sense, we see as ideology, and vice versa. So the idea is to find out what is optimal for Greece so that we have a viable, developing and growing economy that will make sustainable the payment of its debt. And I'm happy to know that you know that we have reached agreements in many issues, and that we are in the process of working even further with you to resolve matters that are subject of negotiations, and that in some we can yield. And you know also that because we have specific commitments to the Greek people, there are other issues which we have costed and we shall not go back. Take pension reform, for example. You call it a rollback. On the other hand, in the view of my government, reducing pensions sharply for those on low pensions is not really a reform. We are in the process of reforming the pension system. This will take time, it will take actuarial studies and all that, but we have costed, that is, a little more than 1 billion not to accept the zero deficit clause in our pension system. This will be done only for this year, and then we will, with your technical assistance, come up with a system that is both fair and viable. Regarding the issue of early retirement, I think we said that in the Brussels group that our government is committed to pass a law that restricts early retirement in most cases, excepting those, for example, where suddenly disability appears and the like. Privatization, another issue that has been raised. I think it is peculiar, to say the least, that a left-wing government is more sincere about privatization than a right-wing government. And there was a lot of talks about how much we are going to get from privatizations, but we are budgeting 1.5 billion, and we're in the process of continuing the process. But in this process, we will improve vastly upon it, especially in the realm of offering safer property rights to bidders and minimizing the likelihood of legal challenges of the sort has led to the undoing of previous privatizations. In this sense, there's nothing worse in privatizations about for the potential investor not to know that his bid is secure. So we would like to ask in the future minimum investment provisions, state equity for the government, local economy development, and some minimum conditions for our employees. And we would like to escape the fire sale logic. On the other hand, we intend to enhance the property right of the bidders by offering them things about the development of their properties that were not there and in fact were gridlocked in those privatizations. So we are very clear about the privatizations we are going to do. We are going to respect everything that has been legally done by the previous government and in fact increase the property rights of those who have entered in a privatization agreement for the Greek government. Now, regarding, for example, issues like the Moratorium of Foreclosures. First, it has not been tabled in Parliament yet. And also, we believe that what can be seen as optimal at the micro level, it would be disastrous at the macro level. It is the fallacy of composition, so to speak. Foreclosures of primary residence at the time when house prices are extremely depressed is in reality undermining the capitalization of the banks, since they further reduce the value of the real estate portfolio. I think people from the Brussels group heard the Secretary General of Public Revenue, Katerina Savaidou, discussing what a disaster was the attempt to go through auctions of people who actually had large properties. The problem was that there is no liquidity, there is no prospect, there are property taxes, no one wants to own property. So unless we accept a level of real estate, of the price of real estate in Greece that is absolutely out of the money, the whole thing would be disastrous in our case. So regarding collective bargaining, we are of course willing to work with the ILO and establishing best practices and not going back to a system that was definitely not optimal. On the other hand, what we see is that as a result of the agreements of the previous government, it has been a total dismantling of collective bargaining in Greece to a level that I don't think that other European countries who have a history of workers' right culture, so to speak, was there. So, and take another example, in labor market reforms, I think we know our labor market better than other people. And one of the basic characteristics of our labor market is that 1/3 of those employed, and let alone the 1/4 of those labor force who are unemployed, are undeclared, uninsured labor. So we said quite specifically what we really need in terms of labor market reform is to make more important and more intense the inspection by the labor inspectorate so that there is a crackdown on undeclared and uninsured labor. This would have very sizable effects on our pension funds, and I think we really underestimated that effect by saying 150 million euros. It will,
because you don't have to carry us through all the 3 days of
okay.
So far, I've not actually received any reaction of yours to what the colleagues were saying. What we are here for is to have an update on where we are, and that we understand where the process is going. And so far, don't concentrate on giving us newspaper headlines. See how you tell us how you see the technical process. We're technicians. We're not public orators. Go ahead.
Okay. We have today submitted to the Brussels group this detailed 26-page document that explains the reform that our government is proposing. So you will see there, when you read it, that we have incorporated feedback from the institutions during the discussion. So I will send it forthwith when we finish this review. But let me read, and I think that we are in a very good direction with the institutions. Now, there is a problem, however, that we should not let the review become a post-mortem. We are running out on the 9th. We shall not legislate in order to soak up from various organizations the last drops of liquidity left. So, in fact, there is no way that we can go beyond the 9th of April. We are very keen to continue with the Brussels groups and the technical team discussions in Athens. We are eager to introduce to Parliament a number of reform bills very quickly, pushing forward mutually agreed reforms. And to be frank, the very idea that the full final review will precede an arrangement that looks after liquidity in the very short run is, in our government's view, quite unrealistic.
So, we've now had very differentiated views on where the process is. Quite frankly, from Nikos, the only thing I gathered on process that you remain willing to talk in Athens and in Brussels, which I think is very fine. Before I open up to colleagues to ask a question or make comments, I would simply say what my understanding is in terms of the process. What we as Euro Working Group need to do is wait until the three institutions and the Greek authorities have reached a complete agreement on a comprehensive list, which is analyzed, costed, and which shows what the economic and fiscal consequences are. This is, of course, in a first iteration, this is not yet the staff level agreement, which would come at a later stage, in which after implementation and compliance reports would lead to the disbursement, I would assume, of EFSF funds, S&P profits, and IMF liquidity followed the relevant national institution. As an intermediate step, and I would like to pick up on what Benoit said, as an intermediate step, one needs to generate a credible perspective of a successful conclusion of the review. And a credible perspective of a successful conclusion of the review is, in my view, and not only my view, a complete list of measures, which I think touches upon those which the Greek government is wishing to implement, but which also needs to deal in a succinct manner with the other 30%, which, at least to take the percentage which Yanis Varoufakis has been mentioning repeatedly, in a succinct manner, 30%. Which are subject, of course, to negotiation if they are to be replaced by other measures. So I guess we are, from what I have heard, still quite a long way even from this intermediate step. And I would invite colleagues to ask some questions, A, on content, and B, on procedure before we conclude. Paul, who wants to take the floor? Any colleagues?
Thomas,
it's Irina here.
Yes, Irina, go ahead.
I just want to check and ask Nikos, how do they see then the payments in April?
Payments in April.
Shall we collect a few comments? And questions? Yes, Basil.
Yes, my question, because we have been talking about the list of measures which were submitted by the Greek side. Frankly, there have been already news in quite a lot of media, so it would be really very helpful to get this list of measures so that we actually know what we are talking about. And I understand from Nikos that he's going to send to the members of the EWG, which would be very helpful.
Possibly. Okay, anybody else?
Thomas, this is Thomas, if I may.
Yes, Thomas.
Yeah, thank you. First on the list, maybe the three institutions could really help me. What kind of list we are now talking about? Is there a full list sent to the three institutions? Or are we talking about the list that is floating around, if I may call it like this, in the internet? I'm simply a little bit puzzled about the state of play. And on the question of Basel, to get the latest version of a list, just to remind you that if you send that list to me, I have to immediately send it to my
entered the conference.
I said I simply have to send it to Parliament immediately. This is very fine for me, but you should be well aware of that. First point. Second point on substance. Would be very helpful to get some more information from the three institutions, and maybe Marco could help us on the latest proposals coming from Athens. I guess this is part of the latest proposals that Greece again is proposing some debt relief, which I fail to understand because Greece has subscribed to honor its commitments. I don't know whether this is true, but again, Marco maybe can help us. Second, on the proposed fiscal measures, as well as on the lower primary surplus, I'm wondering with those measures how the three institutions at the end of the day can confirm that sustainability. I simply don't know, but to have some flavor, again, would be quite helpful. On process, Thomas, totally agree with what you just said. We need a complete agreement on the comprehensive list. And just to add to that, let's be as precise as possible because we are all under, I would call it, democratic control. What I would need for any disbursement, which, by the way, would be very much in line with our statement 20th of February. I first need the staff level agreement. As you said, comprehensive one. Second, I need a report of the state of play of the fifth review, including a debt sustainability analysis. I very much hope that the three institutions will be in a position to confirm that this is what they are working on. The third point is that I would need a compliance report on the implementation of all the measures by Greece. The fourth point I would need is some early warning if there are significant changes of the conditionality in the MOU, because as you know, and I've said that in the past several times, I have to go to the plenary of my parliament for any significant change of the MOU, and I'm sorry for that, but just to be as transparent as possible. And at the end of the day, on that basis, I can go to my bosses and to the parliament to suggest to disperse the tranche, and not the other way around. So please keep that in mind, that obviously we have a lot of work ahead of us. We are very willing to cooperate as closely as possible and to accelerate the speed of work as Marco has clearly worked out. But this is the clear sequencing that we have ahead of us. So I would not see a real chance to disperse around the 9th of April,
just for the matter of clarity and honesty between us. Thank you very much.
Very much. Other questions or comments?
This is Tuomas.
Yes.
Thanks. I managed to cut myself off for a moment, so I may have missed someone's questions. Sorry if I repeat them. But first, I too would be interested to hear the answer to Irena's question. I may have misheard, but I thought Nicholas said that there's no way they can go beyond 9th of April. Was this really what Nicholas said, or did he say something else? Second question, Thomas, you said much noise in the line right now. Are you hearing me?
Sort of, yes.
Okay. Yeah. Good. You referred to the possibility as an intermediate step towards more liquidity to create this credible prospect of a positive outcome that Benoit referred to. I'm hearing my own voice. This is terrible. But correct me if I'm wrong, but this credible prospect that Benoit was referring to was only about the waiver. So the use of Greek government bonds as collateral, and in my understanding that would not help at all, or at least not by much, with liquidity. What would help with liquidity would be increasing the ceiling for T-bills, the use of T-bills as collateral, and then combined with relaxation of the supervisory instructions not to purchase T-bills by the bank. So it seems to me that ECB, getting more ECB money to help with liquidity might be quite a hurdle to meet. Maybe Benoit could comment on that. Final point. Like Thomas Stefan, given the fact that we have 2.5 weeks to go to our elections, the only disbursement that we could envisage in these circumstances would be one with staff level agreements on a full review, and any kind of sanctioning would be totally impossible at this point. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Thomas. Somebody's playing music. Okay, stop. I think I'll take one more question or comment and then ask the institutions and Nikos to give some intermediate responses at least. And if there's anybody else.
It's Rosa here. I don't know whether...
Rosa, go ahead.
Hi, hello. I would like to insist on the liquidity issue, as some other colleagues pointed out, about this liquidity situation up to the 9th of April and afterwards, taking into account that it doesn't seem plausible that disbursement will be made in April, taking into account of the state of play of this situation. And secondly, I would like the institutions, if they can comment now in the next steps, whether they see the list we have now, the new list Nico was referring to, is there a substantial difference from the list the minister presented to us in February? So is there a more comprehensive approach to all the measures and chapters and matters it can deal with, or is a similar list we had before? I don't know whether it's a substantial change from the list we had, or it's a similar type of list we had before.
Right.
And if I can add a specific question for Benoit, because my impression is that, at least, my personal impression, that I heard the ECB today a little bit more optimistic than the Commission and the IMF. So I don't know what probability Benoit will assign to reaching this intermediate point this perspective of having a successful completion of the review. Thank you.
Righto. I will turn maybe first to Marco to answer. I think very much centers around the list. What kind of list? What is the status? And quite frankly, is it intelligent to circulate? Much of what Thomas Steffen said, I think, are clarifying comments for the benefit of Nikos. Then there's issues around liquidity, etc. So, Marco, comments?
Yes, Thomas. Now, first point on the list. I mean, we have received written material. Nikos recall that in the last days, including this morning, which present the views of the, let's say, of the authorities on a number of measures and possible reforms. I recall what you, Thomas, indicated at the very beginning, namely that there is an agreement that what would emerge as the list would be something which has the full backing of the institutions and not simply, let's say, the ideas or proposals by the Greek authorities, precisely to, let's say, frame the next stage in the process, which may allow, I think, to genuinely consider that by implementing those measures, the review would have a chance to be completed. And with that, possibly, and here I talk under the control of Benoit, who can confirm or not, possibly unlock some decisions of the ECB on, let's say, matters which are under their responsibility, and which could, if they come, let's say, if the process is sufficiently speeded up, would lead them to alleviate some concerns as to the liquidity situation. Now, in the light of this, while understanding Basil's points on the, say, knowing what the present material is, I call it like that rather than let's say, a list. Considering the usual institutional concerns that Thomas Steffen indicated, and let's say, in spite of the generosity of Nikos in terms of putting this available for the benefit of the knowledge of the colleagues, I would be a little bit wary on let's say, having a full distribution of this, because it may crystallize, let's say, the intentions around something which has not yet the backing of the institutions and needs to be discussed thoroughly in the Brussels group. So we see what has been distributed by the Greek authorities, the written material, as contributions to the Brussels group discussions, rather than something that could be sent to Urbi et Orbi. By the way, I do not know whether what is circulating on the web is this or not. I would hope that this is and will remain confidential. So this on one point. On the, I think on the 9th of April, deadline for the repayment, and considering what has been said by colleagues and the state of play on the discussions, I would reiterate what I indicated at the very end of my previous intervention, namely that we should work on a double track. On the one hand, clearly speed up the whole process of discussions to come to an agreed list, which can be supported by all the institutions. And second, we would urge the Greek government to pass a law on access to resources in general government entities. I recall here that in a number of countries, including I think the country the president of the Eurogroup knows best, this legislation exists, so it would not be anything Greek specific or unprecedented. At the same time, I think would be very helpful. We are ready to provide our technical support, also with the help of the countries having this type of legislation to help the Greek government to pass this. I think on the question of Thomas Steffen on the debt relief, maybe Nikos should be the one who replies. We stick to the agreement to fully supported by all the parties, all the countries in the Eurogroup, namely that full repayment of all the creditors will take place, and there is a Greek commitment on that. Let me say also that in terms of technical support, we are ready to engage and to help the Greek authorities also on the issue of what we call the humanitarian concerns, so to pass laws which allow to indeed help to establish proper safety net to tackle very urgent social issues in a way, as I indicated before, which would not be, let's say, detrimental or having possibly unintended damaging effects on other parts. I mean, we support the objective, we are fully behind it, and we are ready to help out on this. Maybe I can stop here. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Marco. I would not want to put Benoit into the position of talking about anything that is a decision of the governing council. Let me just say that in personal response to Thomas, I have heard some ambitions, not out of central banking circles, but some ambitions that if such a credible perspective, the successful conclusion of the review were forthcoming, that could indeed, in all autonomy, have some emotional inputs on how central bankers view T-bill limits. As I said, this is not coming from central banking circles, but
Thomas,
I would not want to put Benoit on the spot with making an answer to that kind of question.
Thomas, I can. I mean, I'm not going to prejudge what the governing council could say or not say, but I can still say a word on on our framework, and which are the rules that we are implementing here. Is that useful to inform the discussion?
Yes, by all means.
So I'm not passing a judgment, but I'm just explaining how the governing council thinks about these issues. And let me first say that it would be a deep mistake to see this process that we are discussing today as being geared at reaching a decision, extracting a decision from the governing council of the ECB. This is something that the Greek authorities should do for their own sake, because it's good for the Greek economy, because it will create growth, and first and foremost, because it will create confidence in financial markets, and particular confidence by foreign investors. So what we are discussing here is a path that can bring Greece back to market access. And anything that the ECB can do or not do will just be a consequence of this process. So it is not the objective of the process. It can be a consequence of the process, but the process has to be undertaken for its own merits. Now, coming to the consequence that the governing council could draw, there are two separate issues. The first issue relates to the waiver, and as I said, the waiver is about having a program which is on track, and so that's about having a credible perspective of a conclusion of a successful conclusion of the review, and that's what we need to see to reinstate the waiver. The second issue, which is separate, is about the T-bill ceiling. Here, the issue that the ECB is facing is the prohibition of monetary financing, and a situation where a government that would have as a sole source of financing bills being purchased by banks relying on central bank money, that is indirect monetary financing. And these are two different discussions that the Governing Council will discuss based on different criteria. So you can have one or the other, or both, or neither of the two. It depends on the one hand, the prospect for a successful conclusion of the review. On the second hand, the prospects of Greece regaining market access, and that's two different discussions. So, the sense of the discussions we're having today is that it's anyway too early to put that discussion to the Governing Council. So I'm not even going to ask the Governing Council today, given the discussion we're having right now. My final remark relates to the liquidity situation. As we've seen over the last weeks and days, there are ways to manage the available cash existing in the general government in a broad sense. There is cash in extra-budgetary entities outside of the central government. There is cash in regional authorities. There are ways to generate cash that are, and we are not suggesting that the government should stop paying pensions or salaries. That certainly would not be our recommendation, and we're not in a position to say that. But there are ways to generate cash, such as selling shares in public companies. So there are different ways to generate cash, and our advice to the government is really to look at all possible ways, possibly using legislative instruments, as Marco suggested. There is a law in the Netherlands that can be replicated quite easily.
Thanks very much, Benoit. Richie?
Thank you, Thomas. Let me just come to a couple of points that were raised. So first, on the fiscal measures that we have seen, it's very clear that the fiscal measures that have been put on the table are moving away from parametric measures that are very easy to implement and easy to collect, to administrative measures that have a very weak history of collections in Greece. As such, the yields that the authorities are considering are far too optimistic. Clearly, a lot more technical discussions need to go into this, but where we currently stand, as we see the measures that have been put on the table, this is just way, way too optimistic. Now, in terms of where these fiscal measures would take us, we need to start from where we currently are today. So for that, we should look at what is the fiscal performance for 2014. And the fiscal performance in 2014, even by the authorities' own estimates, falls very far short of the primary surplus target that was set for last year. You'll recall that the primary surplus target was 1.5% of GDP. The authorities are projecting that they will fall very far short of that. The technical discussions are continuing, and we think that there could actually be a deficit that will be registered last year. And this is entirely because of non-implementation of measures and backtracking on measures in the later part of last year by the previous government. This will, of course, impact the base for 2015. And again, the technical discussions need to take place, but the carryover will be that there will be a deficit also for this year as a starting point. Now, there was a question on the debt sustainability, and obviously the debt sustainability would have to come later once the entire package of policies is seen. Let me just summarize and coming back to some of the points that were made earlier, even in regard to the list that the authorities have put forth. On process, there has been some progress, but on substance, the snapshot of where we stand today, that we are very far apart on issues across the board. And importantly, we are getting further away insofar as there continues to be backtracking in several key areas of this review. Let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rishi. Nikos?
Okay, so let me reiterate again that we're soon running out of money, and it's very hard to go beyond the 9th of April. Now, both Marco and Benoit mentioned the extra cash that is there available, and it requires legislation. But our Parliament will not pass such legislation, since it would not suffice both for IMF repayments and paying for wages and pensions. So it would not make a difference. Now, recall that our stress state has already made payments of almost 7 billion this year without having benefited from scheduled disbursements. So we paid 7 billion but received none. Now, regarding the measures list, now the Brussels group has received a comprehensive list in Excel form of our reform proposals that demonstrates the 70-30 mix, that is, which measures from the 10th of December list from the institutions we accept, and which we propose to change and how. Today, we improved on that list after the discussions we had in the Brussels group. And we have sent this detailed document outlining our proposal for each one of these measures, both the 70% and the 30% parts. Now, I understand that, and I think everybody understands, that this is a working document that reflects the position of the Greek government. Of course, it's not something that has been agreed by all parties. But I would like to send this document to the members of the Euro Working Group. I mean, you're trusted colleagues. I mean, it is to you that we address our reform proposals. So I don't think that certain things should be censored before per usum Delphini, and then after that we should send these documents to the Euro Working Group. So if you all agree, I should send to you both the document and the Excel spreadsheet on that.
Okay, colleagues, I said there was some kind of intermediate answering now from the institutions and Nikos. I think what the questions and comments that we've heard from you were quite pertinent. Is there anything else you would want to comment on or ask from the institutions or Nikos?
Thomas, this is Thomas again.
Yes, Thomas.
Just, as you said, I really don't want to put Benoit in a hard place, so I'm not doing that. But I mean, just two technical questions. Am I right that reinstating the waiver in itself would have small or no effect on the government liquidity? That's the first question. And the second question, am I right that if the governing council decided to raise the ceiling for the use of T-bills as collateral, that alone would also have little effect on government liquidity, because by supervisory decision, banks will be prohibited to buy those T-bills. So, in addition to monetary policy decisions, this would require also supervisory decisions. So that was my question. I didn't want to ask Benoit to speculate on what the governing council might or might not decide.
But SSM will do it immediately.
Anybody else?
Yes, it's Jeff here. Can I come in?
Yes, sure.
Well, it's just to follow up on what Basil said on the list of reforms, because some of us might get into a somewhat difficult situation in the sense that there are apparently bits and pieces on the internet on this list that has been sent by the Greek authorities, and of course
taking account of the rather long tradition of leaks and so on, it would be very embarrassing for us if one day this list is being published somewhere and our minister asked us, how come that you didn't have the list beforehand? So I understand the argument, of course, of Marco and Thomas and so on, but I would like just to draw your attention to the fact that some of us might get into the pickle.
We don't want to be pickled now. Anybody else?
Thomas, this is Thomas.
Thomas again?
No, it's just a question to you, Thomas. I think we should leave it in your hands how to communicate if needed, and not to leave it to all parties involved to communicate to the outside world about today's outcome of this telephone conference. I can well imagine that now circulating some list, whatever the list will be, might also lead to some further communication. As I said to you, I have to forward that list immediately to the Parliament. So the discussion about the quality and the quantity of the list will immediately start. So I would be more than happy to know that you will be the one to communicate and to give the right messages on the state of play, and not to leave it to all parties involved to communicate. Thank you.
So,
Thomas, this is Hans. Can I come in?
Hans, yes, please come in.
I would seriously try to advise against sending this list around. I give my reasons for this. Not I don't know the list either, and I think it's good that I don't know it, because if I would have it, my parliament would ask for it, just as in Germany. And our Greek colleague Nikos should realize that if this list has been sent to parliament, the parliament in our country will think something about this, and this will certainly not help the negotiations. So really, we shouldn't do this. If you want to kill any prospect of getting results in the coming months, we should send this list around, and we're back at square one. Thanks.
Thank you, Hans. I think I get the drift. Any other further questions, comments? So maybe let me try and make
Thomas, I can answer Thomas if you so.
Excuse me, yes, of course. Sorry, go ahead.
So it's yes and yes. That's the answer. So indeed, there are two separate issues, which is the amount of T-bills which is allowed under monetary policy, so the T-bill which is allowed as collateral to monetary policy, and also there is a monitoring of the amount of T-bills held by the Greek banks by the ECB in the framework of the ELA monitoring, in order to make sure that there is no monetary financing. So that's the monetary policy aspect of it. And as Thomas said, there is separately a supervisory decision to restrict the outstanding of T-bills and more generally the exposure to the federal government by Greek banks for liquidity reasons. And these are two separate decisions. So for anything to happen, you will need two decisions, one by the Governing Council on the T-bills related to the monetary financing concern, and another decision by the Supervisory Board also based on supervisory grounds, on prudential grounds. And these are two separate decisions due to the separation principle.
Thanks very much for this clarification. Let me try and summarize where we are. From the institutions and from the Greek authorities, there are obviously quite significantly differing perceptions of where we are. But let me first start off maybe with the question of the list. The list is, for me, some kind of intermediate product. I would not wish to have knowledge of it if I can avoid it somehow. And this would be in all program discussions that we have ever had a first. And I think it was with a very good reason that we have not interfered in this process between the institutions and the country concerned for very good reasons. And I think our Irish and Cypriot and Portuguese and Spanish colleagues can very much testify to that fact, because generating a huge chatter and preconceived notions about what should be in the list, what should not be in the list, how it is to be evaluated, how it is to be costed, what the effects on the DSA are. All of a sudden, you get a viral process with a huge multiplier, and you will never, ever be able to catch this cacophony. So, quite frankly, having shot oneself successfully in one knee, this process of wanting to publish it, to me, looks a bit like looking for the second knee. It's something you guys don't want to know. And if you're a minister, you don't want to know officially. If your minister starts accusing you of not having it, download it from the internet. It's been leaked anyway. Call the Financial Times, whatever. But I would seriously counsel Nikos against circulating it. If Nikos wants to circulate it, it's very much it's your decision, Nikos, and be free to do it. I'm just trying to give advice with only one interest in mind, that is a successful and rapid conclusion of this process. But it's your choice, quite obviously. Secondly, where do we stand? We are more at the beginning, I think, of a process than reaching the end of a process. Nikos said that the teams of the three institutions were technically ill-prepared. Quite frankly, we're 9 weeks after the elections. I take it as given that indeed there have only been 4 serious days of technical discussions, and at least in all of my experience, which covers also some decades with some relation to IMF programs, and this is the first time I've heard that the technical teams were ill-prepared. But there is always a first, obviously. So I think after 9 weeks, we hopefully should have now arrived at the stage where things can function. Quite obviously, the list I don't want to know contains is part of an iterative process. It is clear from what colleagues from the institutions have said that we are still a very long way away from this being an agreed list, making full use of the flexibility that is in the program, of course. But first, one needs to define, and I think the Greek colleagues have done this, one needs to define what do the Greek authorities want, and then one needs to have an agreed process. And how do we deal with all the other things that, for a variety of reasons, the Greek authorities at this stage do not feel like doing? So one needs to, how does one deal with the delta in a way? So I think what was said, that the intensity and the pace of this process, especially that in Athens, needs to be very, very significantly ramped up. This seems to be the strong impression, and I think Nikos would agree that it is important, that it is intense, that it is well informed, that seniors from the Greek institutions participate, and that people are empowered to say what needs to be said there. So I think that this should be possible. The information by the institutions that there has been quite some backtracking. Nikos has
entered the conference.
Nikos has said, yeah, but this was on issues where we didn't feel compelled to consult or something to that effect. I think this need to agree on something goes across the whole spectrum of the policy spectrum. In order to come to some kind of intermediate conclusions, obviously there needs to be an agreed costing of measures, and I'm mindful of what Rishi said about the very, very big estimates that the Greek colleagues appear to have provided.
Has entered the conference.
In terms of timing, I am working on the assumption that colleagues, both in Athens and in Brussels, will continue to work around the clock. As I don't want to know the list, I don't know how large the delta towards an intermediate solution is. But from what was said today, it appears not to be a matter of hours or of days, but more of a longer process. It also seems to me that this is not just a matter of, let's say, technical clarifications, but that this would
has entered the conference.
But that this would require decisions, presumably at the political level in Athens, to include things in the list or to exclude things from the list, as the case may be. Which implies that we will, at the Euro Working Group, which we will be having next Wednesday, another update. This is exactly a week from now, so we will have an update to hear what have been the achievements in Athens, what have been the achievements in Brussels in the intervening week. And I hope that these achievements will have been very, very significant. Will they suffice in order to produce this final intermediate paper, which is so comprehensive and so costed, and that it forms a very credible basis and perspective for a successful conclusion of the review? I simply do not know. If you turn up with it on Wednesday, 1 minute before the meeting starts, I will be very happy, and we will postpone the meeting for an hour in order to be able to give a first look at it. So I would very, very much welcome that. Let us work on the assumption that maybe it will not be possible, because if it is possible, then we take it from there. If it is not possible, as I said, then the following week everybody decamps to Washington. I would very much hope that the technical teams continue. Discussions also in Brussels may continue. And then we are moving steadily towards the Eurogroup on the 24th of April in Riga. I think it is absolutely paramount importance that we have a Euro working group, at least in this form of a conference call, at the beginning of the week, so that ministers enter the Eurogroup completely informed. As is the case for next Wednesday, I would very much hope that this very comprehensive, fully costed, and mutually accepted list of measures would be available then. If I have not been precise enough in previous rounds, this comprehensive list is not a unilateral list. It is one which bears the signature not only of the Greek authorities, but of the three institutions or four institutions involved. That is just so that is fully clear, but I think this would have been clear anyway. If that were to be the case, that there is then that agreement, I would, and this is recommended by the institutions, I could imagine that ministers in the Eurogroup produce a statement welcoming this production of a comprehensive, fully costed, mutually acceptable, and positive list, which sort of paves the way, as it is so comprehensive, for producing later staff-level agreements and ultimately, after implementation and compliance reports, disbursements. So there is one strand of possibility that we have this agreement reaching us by next Wednesday. That requires a huge amount of work and a fabulous speeding up of technical experts' work in Athens. If that is not the case, I think our next rendezvous after next Wednesday would be 10 days or 12 days hence at the end of the week where Riga takes place. I think a number of suggestions have been made on the liquidity issue. I don't think that this is the place or the time to go into that in any detail. Let me just finish by reminding our Greek colleagues that there are rules in place which govern the selection of personnel for the HFSF, which is required, which have been put into place by mutual consent as part of the overall arrangement in order to ensure that the HFSF is indeed an institution which is run at arm's length from any government. So this is not a political issue, this is a generic governance issue. These selection procedures, which involve the whole Euro working group, have been respected in the past. And if they were not respected this time around, and there are all sorts of stories about why the people have stepped down, if they were not respected this time around, I would be forced to write a letter to that effect to the president of the Eurogroup, and I think that is something which we should avoid at all costs. So that would be more or less how I see the process and the procedure. If there is anybody with violent disagreement with this, this is now the time to say so. Other than that, we would be seeing each other next Wednesday, and if something spectacular, dramatic, and I hope with very good news happens in the meantime, I would expect that the institutions would inform us and I could inform you in turn. Any?
Thomas?
Yeah?
Yes, sorry Thomas, Rishi here from the IMF, if I may come in. Just on the point that you were making about the technical work continuing, our teams have been on the ground for 3 weeks. And we are going to need to, along with the other two institutions, as we've discussed also with the authorities, we're going to have to pull them back for Easter. We, of course, stand ready. We have a presence on the ground with our resident representatives and can cover any of the issues that might arise in the meantime. When the authorities are ready, they do have to do preparatory work. When they are ready, we can come back. But as of now, given the 3 weeks of work that we've done on the ground for Easter, we do need to come back. Thank you.
Right. Thanks very much. As we are well aware,
can I make a
in
point?
electronic media nowadays, it should not be too difficult to also work online between Athens and capitals. Yes? Who was it? Who was else also coming in?
Yes, I'm Nicholas. To make a few points. The first is regarding the HFSF. Let me state that the Greek government operates perfectly within the bounds of legality. The second point I would like to make is about the comment that it was a first that people from IMF and other institutions were not well prepared. First of all, I would like to say that we have really top-notch people in Athens, and we value they're great.
Because we don't have to go through the whole last one, three-quarters of an hour again.
I'm just to say that what I said about not being well prepared, I didn't mean like that. Okay. And also regarding the reform list, you mentioned ramifications that I will take into consideration, certainly. I just wanted you to know that I wanted other members of the Euro Working Group to have a feeling of the type of reforms we are proposing. But since, you are saying that if this is done, then this will be a problem, I'm happy to let the list stay within the members of the Brussels group, but I must say that if you read lists or documents in the internet, in cyberspace, the blogosphere, do not assume that this is the list we have submitted to the Brussels group. Okay, thank you very much.
Right, just a final remark. Nikos, that's fine if the Greek government is operating within legality. That's extremely fine. But if that includes the agreement which govern the appointment of HFSF personnel, so we will produce a very short summary, as usual, of the call. We meet again next Wednesday, and if there are any exciting news in the meantime, hopefully full of Easter enlightenment, you will be informed forthwith. So,
Thomas, is Marco.
Yeah, Marco, sure.
Sorry, as you recall at the very beginning, the news of this EWG conf call has been reported widely. So there will be questions on the outcome of this. I think it would be highly welcome if, in a sense, complementing what Thomas Stefan indicated before, you would be the one, providing this answer, and I think it would be good that we have a line to take here, being as laconic as possible, and not start to speculate on different things being said or not being said, different positions, etc. etc. I think that would be, it seems to me, the only responsible thing to do at this stage.
Yes. No, I apologize. I had indeed, I should have mentioned that, as Thomas has said. Normally, it is not common knowledge. I would have thought when we meet, that used to be the case in the Monetary Committee when we had exchange rate realignments, but those are long time gone. Let alone do the media know what the agenda of our meetings is. So this is slightly different this time around, and I don't know where this public bordering on hysteria has come from. So if people are in agreement, then I would respond just with 2 or 3 very laconic technical sentences. I would say that the only purpose of this conference call was to be updated by the 3 institutions and the Greek colleagues on where the talks in Athens and in Brussels are at. Secondly, we have taken note that there has been progress and convergence over the last days, but that still quite some work remains to be done in order to come to a successful conclusion of this part of the process, and that we stand ready to fully engage within our mandates as soon as there is an agreed output, which is agreed between the Greek authorities and the 3 institutions. I think that is within limits quite honest. It is not so stupid that people start laughing, but it gives a bit of a drift without raising too many questions which we might not want to answer. That notwithstanding, I am resigned to the fact that very many people will be informing very many media, but this is what I am going to say if asked, and if not asked, I will not say. That sounds more or less satisfactory. Don't engage now in micro-tuning.
Thomas, this is Thomas. May I just add to your wording and the language that still the aim is the successful conclusion of the current review. I guess this is still an important point to be mentioned. Thank you.
Okay, for sure.
Thomas, this is Hans. Can I say something?
Hans, yes.
Very shortly, I fully agree with what you said about the order of things. Maybe we should talk next week when we meet fiscally, because I think we're not far off. If EWG calls and meetings are in the media before, we're not far off from the fact that I will need mandate from Parliament to say something here. So, I mean, this is going in the wrong direction, and we cannot work anymore if everything is out in the press. So we should think about it. I know it's not your problem, it's our problem. So sorry for having this intervention, but we should talk about it.
Yeah, it's a mutual problem. It's not only your problem, it's a mutual problem. But, I think this is a special case because for some reason, and I would not care to speculate who has been hyping this conference call as sort of unlocking liquidity from the ECB and God knows what, which for anybody who knows the process was quite a crazy thing, but so this is being bandied about by people who don't know anything about the process, which doesn't help us very much. So if for the future we can keep expectations low to the ground in our amongst our domestic audiences, keep to the confidentiality which is required also by our statutes. Maybe we have a short discussion of these issues, of how we work, what the confidentiality issues are, and how things are spread back home, etc., etc. Maybe we'll have a short talk on these issues when we meet next week again. So my preference is that none of you, of course, produces any statements to the press. My very strong preference is that nobody asks me about it, but if I'm asked, I will respond exactly along the lines that I have just mentioned. Okay, thanks very much, and if we don't meet each other or hear from each other again, happy Easter, as they say, and see you next Wednesday.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.